Hello everyone. Today we'll formally start the Flutter UI development. So I call this chapter Flutter 1, and it's a very small chapter. So I think if you remember our discussion in the past, we were talking about Dart programming language, and Dart programming language is actually the baseline for Flutter programming, as we might see a little bit later on. So the thing is, when you see the Flutter program that you'll be seeing later on, it is a bit different from the Dart programming language we have seen, because Flutter rearranged it a bit different, but you can easily convert that same line of code or that statement into the Dart programming language that you have already known. So the contents of this chapter are as follows, but we'll not be seeing all of this today. I think today we'll be talking about maybe widgets and compositions, project UI, widget tree, Flutter and custom widget, project code dependency, and then about package, and from here to here I think we'll see on the next lecture. So I will be a little bit slower, so don't get bored, because I want to discuss this part of the Flutter very slowly, so that you can easily understand. But once we get to know how it is related to Dart and understand how we can use our Dart knowledge, then we can easily go or we can easily speed up. Another thing, so Dart is more of, so far we've discussed about Dart. So Dart is more of about the coding, okay, about the functionality and the logic. The word I was looking for, the logic behind the programming. So Flutter is about the user interface part of the programming, okay. So if you're confused, like what is a part of Dart and what is a part of the Flutter framework, so both are frameworks. So the Dart framework for the logic for writing the program, and the Flutter framework or the Flutter SDK allows us to render our Dart code into a user interface. So if you remember correctly, the first time, we didn't do this. I thought we did. So I think at the first chapter, or chapter 1, if we were following that IDE of the normal course, we'd have created this by ourselves. But now let's just forget about that, especially the first 2 lines, and then we'll discuss most of it as we go on. So Flutter, if you follow the IntelliJ IDE, it will create some default app, okay, and in that default app you might find a file called main.dart, and this is actually the entry point of your program. However, you can have another Dart file as your entry program, okay. Finger crossed that we might be able to open class after 2 weeks, hopefully. So at this point we don't have the IDE in our computers. The reason why I'm not giving you the IDE lecture for your computers is because the setting up the Flutter IDE and IntelliJ IDE, the Flutter SDK and the IntelliJ IDE in your computer, it takes too much memory or too much resource. So I assume some of you may not have that powerful computers that we have in our labs, so that's why I skipped that part, by the way. So but to be able to understand what we are talking about, you can go to dartpad.dev. okay, open your internet browser and go to dartpad.dev. So you'll see something similar to this, or if you open like a new dartpad.dev, usually it will bring something similar to this. Okay, you may be asking, if we have this kind of good IDE, why didn't we learn about it early on in our coding, or why didn't we use this, and why did we choose to use JDoodle? Because this Dartpad does not allow us to how to say, it doesn't allow us to it doesn't allow us to receive console inputs. Okay, so that is why we could not use this Dartpad, and you can see I can zoom in and see the code we are talking, but we are not going to talk about this. So you can go and select counter up. Okay, there is samples here, if you can see it. So go to samples and select counter. You may select any sample. Okay, by the way, if you select like implicit animation, it will run something, and if you select probably when you click disk, it will change. But you can create any, or you can draggables, like you can create some kind of this, but our goal is for you now to create the counter app, which look like this, and then we'll use this counter app in order to demonstrate the first part of Flutter. Okay, so I think 150, yeah, so that you can see the code, I'll put it on 150. And by the way, this means without raising a single finger, you have developed your program. So if you run this program in Android or in iOS or in iPhone, it will actually, you will find an app that will exactly looks like this. Okay, and then whenever you press this button will increase the number. Okay, so this is actually an Android app. Okay, if you can literally run this code as I have done in in my phone actually, and also in my emulator. This is just an app that works both in iPhone and Android devices, or in iOS and Android devices. If you collapse the code, that means if you collect the code into its parts, then this app has 4 parts. Okay, as we know, every time a Dart or basically a Flutter programming has to start from the main function, right? So you have the main function, and the main function calls myApp class, or it instantiates myApp class. Okay, and then we have 3 other classes. Class myApp, which extends, you know about extending, right? So it inherits something. If it extends, means it's the relationship is inheritance, an easy relationship, if you remember our discussion. So That's not the point. The point is we have the four components. The main component where the program starts running. We have the my app, then my home page, and then the my home page state, or the state of this my home page. One thing you should know is that this, even if when you create a Flutter project, even if you find like my app, my homepage state, these are not actually keywords. Okay, these are something that you create, like the classes we created. So I can go here and I can rename my app to my first app, and then I have to call my first app here. Okay, and then if I run it, it is the same thing. So these are the names that you can change, or the names that you can give. So most of the time these kind of things are confusing, but yeah, so but this stateless widget and stateful widget, these are classes by or other interfaces provided by Flutter. You haven't written, you are not the one writing stateless widget and stateful widget. Okay, you are extending some things that are given by Flutter. Okay, but this class my first app, class my homepage, or you can say class my counter page. Okay, if I can say class my counter page, but I have to update this class my counter page. Okay, there might be some errors. Yeah, so here is our constructor. For instance, I have to update and then create state my home page. This has to be my counter page, and then yeah, so all done. So you might have to update a little bit of code here and there. So here is our class my counter page. My counter page is has its own constructor, and it has a create state. So we'll also discuss what create state is. Okay, for now just don't worry about it. This is some of the method that Flutter gives us. So if you run the program again, you'll have no issues, and you'll get this kind of program. So this is the same thing that we have been using so far. Okay, and we already know that Dart allows multiple classes under a single file. So if all these classes are in under one class, then there is no problem. In Java, one class per or at least one public class per one file, but that is not the case for Java. So your programming of the Flutter, it is like composing, or it is actually solving a puzzle. Okay, the jigsaw puzzle. I'm sure you are familiar with this jigsaw puzzle, right? So in this jigsaw puzzle, you'll be given just smaller parts, and then you will find the fitting piece, and then fill each piece by piece in order to make the bigger picture, right? So writing the Flutter program is like completing a jigsaw puzzle. Okay, and the user interface of the Flutter programming is made from different widgets, or sorry, I keep saying widgets. Yeah, so we, like, some people call it widget, but the right pronunciation is widget. Okay, as you can see here, everything in Flutter is widget. Sorry for saying widget again and again. It's a force of habit that I first read this as widget, like when I was in school, and now I keep referring it as widget, but the right naming is widget. So if somebody is saying widget, don't be confused. So as I was saying, writing a program in Flutter is like combining jigsaw puzzles, or filling the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. And the bigger widget is coming from putting more widgets together, and the part of actually combining or mixing these widgets is called compositions. Okay, and then the widget is actually hierarchical. That means there is some kind of patriarchy or rank between widgets. The bigger widget contains the smaller widget, and the smaller widget contains more smaller widgets. So you can see that I have a widget container. This widget contains widget 1 and widget 2, and widget 1 contains widget 1.1 and widget 1.2, and then the same for widget 2 containing 3 other widgets. If you ever had kind of how to say, an experience in developing an HTML file, actually Flutter development is somehow similar to that. Okay, so you can see that these two codes, one is HTML code and one is Flutter code, and what they are trying to do is actually trying to create a box. Both of them, like this one creates a box in HTML, and this one creates a box in Flutter, and they will probably put some word like lorem ipsum, like lorem ipsum, and then this one also does. So these two things, this one creates in HTML, this one creates in Flutter, and you can see that, oh, I say that, okay, create a division. This means a division using this class, and this class defines the background of the rectangle, the height and the width and the font used in this rectangle. The same thing in Dart code. You say create me a container, so this kind of container, and in that container I will have what is the child. So when you have one element in this container, you say child, but when you have multiple maybe components or multiple widgets in this container, you say children, and then you write, as we'll see a little bit later on. So I say I'll create a text, and then you can see the size of the text, the width of the text, the family of the width. The text is defined. So text, the text that I'm going to write, and then the style of the text, okay, and then the width, the height, and the color of the container, and also the width, the font, the size, the weight, and the family of the text. This is basically almost there is some similarity into creating an HTML and Flutter widget. So let's take a look at this Flutter UI for a yes/no dialog. Probably you are familiar with this when you are downloading an app. Maybe they say grant access or no, or you are trying to confirm something like that, and then they will ask you to say yes or no. So this is quite common in your Android programming, or in your in your Android phone or iOS phone. So you can see that I create some kind of column, and then I put a text. So you can see that this, do you want to buy this item? right? So I created a text here. Do you want to like buy this item? And then I created what? I created two text buttons or two selection buttons. So this is basically what I did. So I came, I say what is the body of this app is going to look like. The body of this app is going to look like to have a text and to have some selection button. And what happens to that selection button? For instance, here the text of the button is yes, and what happens, or this method yes on top will be called when I touch this button, and no will be touched when I type this button, or no on top will be called when I type this button. No, when I press this button. And another thing we probably see from this example is that in the previous example there is only one widget here, the text widget, right? So we said child here, okay? But when you have multiple child, you say children. So I'll have children of widget. Another thing I would want to explain here is that normally you are familiar with this definition, okay? Normally when you have this kind of table, this side is called column, and this one is this side is called row, right? But in Flutter this is normal. In Flutter it is the opposite, okay? So when you have some kind of table, this part is said row, and this part is said column, okay? So that is why, for instance, you can see that the body is going to be a column, and in that column I will have children, okay? In this column I will have children. The first children is going to be a text, so it is going to be a text. But the second column inside my second column, so this is the first column and this is the first column, and then this is the second column. In this second column I will create a row. I will not use the whole thing, I will create a row. So this is the first row and this is the second row. So you can see that the definition of row and column in Flutter is reverse. So this is basically, you can see like, okay, this is your like your mobile. So this side is going to, like the mobile, this side is called column and this side is called row. Okay, so that is one thing that is a bit confusing when you start to probably learn Flutter. Okay, so let's take a look at this animation, and you can see that in this animation what is happening in the widget tree. Okay, when you click it, it will go to my cart, and then you can go to buy. The same thing will continue. Okay, so here first my login screen, you logged in. When you log in, you'll come into the second widget or the second page in this case. So you select and you press add item, and then you'll go to the second widget, the third widget. So this is how actually the widget tree and pages between different parts of an app work in Flutter. So let's come back to our widget tree and how it is composed. So we've seen the counter app, right? So which part is what? We are going to see that. So what is what in your widget tree? Okay, so the previous animation was to get you familiar how it works, right? So the whole thing, actually, the whole thing of your app is called my app, and my app calls the material app. The material app, you don't, like, as a beginning Flutter programmer, you don't have to care about it. Okay, the material app is what provides you like these kind of buttons. It has design for the buttons, these text displays and text boxes, check boxes. It has the definition for all this. So you call the material app, and then you call my homepage. This is where you start coding. This part of the app is coded for you by the Flutter, or is provided by you. So your app comes within, after my homepage, and you can see that the whole thing is called, this whole thing is defined inside my homepage. Okay, starting from here to here, and then I have 3 layers. Okay, or I have 3 trees in our counter app. I have the app bar tree, which displays the name of the app. I have the floating action button with an icon of addition, and you can see that I have that part of the widget here, and then I have the center app seated here. So what is it saying? Okay, put it on center. Okay, put it in center, and in that center create 2 columns. Create 2 columns, not 2 rows. Create 2 columns, and then in the first column I will have text. In the second column also I will have text, and then the first value of the text is going to be you have pushed the button this many times, and the second part of the text is going to be 0, but it is going to be updated every time we press this button. But the user interface is saying this. Okay, so the default application contains many widgets, even as a beginning widget. It has 2 custom widgets, my app widget and my homepage widget. My app widget is custom widget of the entire application, and my homepage widget, which is this. My homepage widget is it contains the layout of the application and covers the main area of the screen. Now you may be wondering, isn't my app and my homepage have the same they have the same functionality? Yes, in this case they have. But if your program has 2 screens, such as this, like for instance, when you press, there is yes and there is no, and this is, let's say this is yes page. Okay, let's call this yes page, and let's call this my homepage. It's just my homepage. Okay, so my app is here. And then my app will directly come to your homepage. It doesn't have to be like my homepage, but just to your homepage, to your first page. And then when you press yes, okay, my app page or my app contains all of this. When you press yes, then you go to your yes page. Okay, it's like when you open an Android phone to play YouTube, and you go to libraries, or you go to favorites, or you go to upload file, something like that, right? There are different pages or different interfaces, So based on this, you go to another. So when you have just one page, as we do right now, when you have just one page, which is called my home page, my app is on top of it. So it looks like my app and my home page are similar things, but you have different pages, or you have multiple pages. Then my app actually contains the whole app of all pages. Okay, so there is a difference, but you cannot be able to see it in this picture. Maybe I will draw another tree as we progress in our Flutter lecture. And then we have also Flutter widgets. Flutter widgets are built by Flutter for us. For instance, such as this floating action button is built for us by Flutter. Okay, so let's discuss our program. Okay, so when you first start your program, the first thing that you see is the main function, right? Void main. And if you remember this, we use this line or this symbol if we have just one line code. When we have one line code, we don't have to use braces and other things, right? So the entry point for Flutter is the main function, because Flutter uses Dart. It is no surprise. It's no surprise there. And then this main function creates an instance of the my app object. Okay, we just have a class, and we use a class of that instance. I mean an instance of that class, and then we use the run app method. This method is not to be found anywhere. Okay, this method, if you go up and down, it is not to be found anywhere. This is method provided to us by Flutter again. So most of the tools that we can use are provided by Flutter for us. So it is okay. And then when I call my run app method accepts an instance of the root widget, and then it renders to fit the screen. That means whichever screen you use, it will read the code under it, and then it will probably display whatever it is asked to do. In this case, we say that my app should be calling my first app, and when my first app class. So when it comes to my first app class, the build method is the first that will be executed. Okay, it will come here and it will just build. Okay, it will just build Flutter demo homepage. You have the title of the homepage here, Flutter demo, and then the theme is blue. You can easily make it, by the way, green. If I say green and run it, probably there should be some change here. Yeah, so you can see that it is green. So you can demonstrate, you can change the behavior of your app coming here, because this is the main function. And then to build this, okay, to build these settings, or to build these buttons and these how to say texts, it calls, what do you want your home to be? Your home to be my counter page. So it will come and ask my counter page. My counter page should create a state. We'll see about this later on, or in the next, probably in chapter 7, we'll discuss more about that and how it works. But for the time being, let's discuss the basics of Flutter. So, but you can change the main function like the regular function that we know of. Okay, you can say void main my app default app and equals to new my app, and then you can call the run app on default app. So you just created an instance of that class, and then you just use it. Okay, So you can see that I changed the program into my first app. MFA assigns new my first app, and then if I say run up my first app, it will just work the same way. But we don't want to write all this jargon, because we want to write as small code as possible. Okay, as we want to write as small instructions as possible. So I'll just continue as it is. So this is basically everything you see here. By the way, the reason I'm discussing that is because everything you see here, this title, something like that, all these things are Dart programming language written in other form. Okay, so for instance, usually you extend something you already know in inheritance, but you are extending now something you don't know from Flutter, which you will know later on, but for the time being that you don't know. And these are the code. It looks like, what is this? But everything you see here is actually a Dart programming language, just written in a different format. Okay, so what is my app? My app is a widget, as I have said. It is a stateless widget, and it's a setup for the material app that contains the my homepage widget. Okay, and what is a material app? A material app is a widget is built in by or the material app is a widget built in Flutter widget, and it serves as a container for your whole app and its widgets. Okay, so this material app contains all of the widgets that you'll be creating. So in this case, probably your hierarchy is my app, material app, and my homepage. So you can see that I call my app at the beginning, and my app calls this class, or run app calls my app, and my app contains material app, and the material app contains my homepage. So this hierarchy is that my app contains material app contains my homepage. This will be different for different apps depending on the class. Okay, and then what are we doing here? I come here, and the material app, the title of the material app is going to be Flutter demo, and then I will talk about the theme of that material app. If I say blue or green, it will change. And what about my home? What is my home is going to look like? By the way, I can just say this as text. Okay, and then it will run as a text. So if you look at this example, for instance, instead of making my counter page the home page, I can just say make this a counter, text hello world, and it will display just this. Okay, so everything you want to display in the mobile phone, and if I run this, you will see this in our phone. But we'll discuss about this simple app and how to write it a little bit. Not a little bit. Yeah, I use this a little bit long time. Lots of times. We'll see that in the next chapter. But at this point, we are more focused on my counter page or my home page, and you run it. It will come back. Okay. So your home page is where the design resides, and now it is the code for my homepage. Okay, what is happening in this my homepage? Okay, my homepage is a stateful widget. A stateful widget means, by the way, a stateful and stateless means that a stateful means it contains data. When you usually this is a common knowledge in networking or network programming. We say that whether this is a stateful protocol or stateless protocol. So it is quite common in networking, but for I think programming language, this is maybe the first time I've heard it. Anyways, a stateful means it will contain data. there will be some change in this widget. There will be a change of feature, a change of data, okay? And then this stateful widget is where all the change happen. And this my homepage class will use this my homepage state, okay? My homepage class uses my homepage state, and usually to make it a little bit private, so that is private within library. I'm not sure if you remember our discussion about private within library, but so yeah, to make it with private within library, we just use this underscore, and this my homepage state does most of the work, okay? It holds the count as state or as data, and it also forms or sets up the child objects, okay? In this case, we have two child widgets, the center widget, which contains the texts, and then the floating or the row and the floating action button that actually increments the number whenever it is clicked. And then we have the set state. So set the state with this information, with this new information, okay? We have the set state method. Set state method is also known by Flutter. Although we define what should be done there, every time a set state method is called, a Flutter knows that the whole thing has to be rearranged, or it should be rebuilt, okay? The set state method alerts Flutter something has changed and it needs to be rebuilt. So it will just, okay, whenever we go to set state calls the build method, okay? It invokes the build method and redraws the whole application. So here is what is happening, okay? Okay, my homepage will create a state. Will create a state with what? The state to be created is my homepage state. I will come here, and then in my homepage state, I will find the build method, okay? Okay, in the build method, what do I have? I have an app bar and the title of that app bar. Okay, the title of that app bar is going to be my widget or my parent widget title. My parent widget is my homepage, and it has a title that it gets from its parent too. So this is the title, okay, given to my homepage, and my homepage passes that title to my homepage state, and my homepage state gets the final title. So it has sorry for going back and forth, but the build method is a scaffold. That means it's a holder. It holds an app bar, and it holds the title of that app bar. So that app bar has a title. So this is, okay, my app bar and the title of that app bar. And then we have a column that holds text and another text. And then we have a floating action button in that program, and that floating action button contains, or at this position we'll put a floating action button, and this floating action button has three properties. When it is hovered, when you hover a mouse around it, it will say increment, and when its icon is the add button, and when you press that button, it calls the increment counter method. Okay, so if we go back and check what this is, an increment counter method increments this counter and calls the set state method. That means every time some data is changed, or every time some data has changed, you have to call the set state method so that everything is rebuilt. Okay, so for instance, you can see that when I hover, it says increment, and then if I press this, so since this is so fast, it doesn't show. But what is happening is that this whole thing is recompiled. Okay, this especially this part is recompiled and re-rendered to fit the user interface. So if I go to probably to 10, that is when you see like, oh, it will push it a little bit, so this text button is now updated a little bit further. If you push more, it will be updated to 100 and beyond. So this is the counter method and how it works. Probably you are familiar with it now. So my assignment or lab practice for you was supposed to be updating this this counter app, but yeah, you cannot practice this in lab, but so this is like an assignment for you. So every lab practice is, by the way, an assignment which we will submit at the end of the class if we continue our online class, but we'll submit on the second week of the face-to-face class, if we ever get the chance to have a face-to-face meeting. So what do I want you to do in this case? What I want you to do is basically replace the code in the floating action button. Okay, in this case we have just where is it? Yeah, we have just a floating action button. Okay, but I want you to replace it with this code and see the difference. Okay, so what do you have to do? What you have to do is replace the previous just floating action button with column, and within that column have two floating action buttons, and the icon for the previous one will be add plus, and the icon for the second one will be minus. And if you see this code, when pressed, the first button, when it is pressed, it will call increment counter, so it will call this method. Okay, and then what I want you to do is to write a method similar to increment counter, which is called reset counter. And reset counter, when it is pressed, it will make, or it will reverse the counting method, or the counting text to back to 0, or this widget back to 0. So you can do this, I think, just by looking at this code and by looking at what is happening there. So in order to get the first counter app, you can easily go to dartpad.dev and find the counter, and then use that counter. So yeah, write a reset counter, and don't forget to use this set state method inside reset counter. Yeah, that's it, I think, for today. So the task or the purpose of this reset button is to return it to 0. So I think you'll be able to just write this code and write the reset counter method and submit the assignment when we meet, or online if we never get the chance to meet. So this will be it for today's class, and I'll see you on the next class or on the next video lecture.